Good morning and welcome. I'd like to welcome all of you to our second business forum of our 2017-2018 season. Today's business forum is also a live program that is being aired on Queens Public Television. We're once again pleased to have such a great turnout this morning for our panel discussion on healthcare. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our corporate sponsors for this season, the law firm Farrell Fritz, PricewaterhouseCoopers, New York Presbyterian Queens, and SCORE New York Metro Area. In addition, I'd like to thank our community sponsors, Borough President Melinda Katz, Queens Chamber of Commerce, Queens Economic Development Corporation, the Queens Tribune and Press, and the Daily News. Our forums and the scholarships they support are possible solely due to the generous donations of our sponsors. We have opportunities both for sponsoring the year-long season of forums or sponsoring an individual forum. Please speak to Dean Michael Wolf if you are interested. If any of you are interested in supporting our forums as an individual, we suggest a nominal donation of $25. Donations can be given to anyone at the reception table outside. I'd like to make a special introduction this morning to a new member of the Queens College family, Zavi Gunn, our new Director of Career Engagement and Internships. Zavi comes to us from the Brooklyn College's Magner Career Center, where she was the Deputy Director. I know she and her team will be working with you to expand our network of internships. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you the President of Queens College, Felix Matos Rodriguez.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Good morning to all. Buenos dias. Welcome to this breakfast, and you're lucky today. Some of you who are participants regular of our family for the breakfast forum know that I use this opportunity always to brag about the college. Since we're being broadcast, on public television, I have limited time, so you get lucky that my time gets shortened. But plenty to be happy about. We're celebrating our 80th anniversary. Yes, and the actual day of our anniversary, October 11th, open up the newspaper, and they're announcing the MacArthur Genius Award winners. And lo and behold, the college got anniversary present. One of our alumni, Cristina Jimenez from the class of 2007, was named one of the MacArthur Award winners, actually the youngest in the group this year. So a testament to the quality of our students. She is a national leader in the movement of the Students Who Are Dreamers. To get DACA made into law, and she began her career here at Queens College as a student activist. And the reason why undocumented students in CUNY pay in-state tuition is a result of her activism when she was an undergrad here. So a testament of that great talent that we have in our students. If you watch television on Sunday and watch the Shark Tank, one of our alumni, Olivier Noel, who graduated from here, originally from Haiti, now doing an MD PhD. He went into the Shark Tank, and Mark Cuban is now an investor in his company. A sign of the entrepreneurship that our students, in this case, someone coming from STEM, sort of had. One news, you could be reading about this early next week, is embargo, so I can only hint at a couple of things, right? But you'll be reading about how some of our students won a really prestigious award in a national competition, beating over 900 teams from all over the country. So stay tuned early next week for a big announcement on, again, the quality, in this case, of the students coming from our business program. So as you see, many good things in this 80th anniversary year. We're doing a whole series of events, so please stay tuned to our website so you can participate. We had the visit a couple of weeks ago of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor to our campus as part of those events. So again, documented that long tradition here at Queens College of quality, excellent education at a very affordable price, and also an education committed to service. So we're honoring that founding elements of our legacy. I have the great honor of introducing the moderator, who will be introducing the rest of the panelists here today. Point of presidential privilege among one of the panelists, Senator Gustavo Rivera, is a long time friend, so we want to welcome him. He is from the Bronx, and
Yes,
before anybody starts talking, he's not seeking any, citywide office, and he's not coming here to test the waters for anything. He's just a dear friend of the City University of New York, very committed to health issues. And when we invited him, the one thing he said is, "You guys do breakfast far too early in Queens." And with that note, it is my great pleasure to introduce the panelist, Cheryl McCarthy. She is a distinguished lecturer of journalism here at Queens College and hosts a weekly talk show called One to One on CUNY TV, where she interviews women who are movers and shakers in many walks of life. Professor McCarthy's journalism career has included being a reporter for the Boston Globe, the Baltimore Evening Sun, and a reporter and education editor in the New York Daily News, a correspondent with ABC News. So someone's had a very distinguished career. We're very lucky that we have her teaching our students, and it is my honor to introduce her and have her take over the rest of the program today. So it's all yours.
Okay. This morning are, to my immediate left, Lisa David, President and CEO of Public Health Solutions, a nonprofit but mostly government-funded organization that works to improve health outcomes in New York City's low-income communities. It serves about 25,000 people a year, and among other services, it helps people navigate the health insurance market, signs them up for insurance, and enrolls them in Medicaid. To my immediate right is Cindy Goff, Vice President for Public Policy of Emblem Health, a New York City-based not-for-profit health insurance company that provides quality, affordable health care coverage and administrative services to more than 3 million people. To my far left, State Senator Gustavo Rivera.
Far left? Perhaps.
Who represents the 33rd Senate District in the Bronx. He is the ranking member of the New York Senate's Health Committee, and in March of this year, he became the main sponsor of the New York Health Act, a bill that would create a single-payer health care system in New York State.
Far left. So,
To my far right is Kate Spaziano, Vice President of External Affairs for the New York Presbyterian Regional Hospital Network. The network is comprised of 4 hospitals in Westchester, Flushing, Queens, and Park Slope, and accompanying physician services division. It contains about 1,000 doctors and is linked closely to Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center and Weill Cornell. The format is simple. I will ask questions, and the panelists will answer them in the most direct and succinct way possible, because we have a lot of ground to cover. If there's time left over after our discussion, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Since the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, nearly 20 million more Americans have gained access to health insurance. In New York State, the New York State Health Exchange has cut the number of uninsured New Yorkers from 10% to 5%. But President Trump has described the Affordable Care Program as disastrous and broken, and has vowed to, quote, repeal and replace it. This is what's happened so far. The Republicans in Congress have failed to pass 4 different bills that would have replaced the Affordable Care Act, because the results would have been so onerous that even they couldn't vote for them. Still, in October, President Trump issued an executive order eliminating the federal subsidies to insurance companies that made insurance coverage more affordable. Meanwhile, the enrollment period for health insurance, which we're in right now, has been shortened from 10 weeks to 6 weeks, and federal funds that were previously used to advertise the enrollment period have been eliminated. Currently, a bipartisan compromise bill negotiated by Senators Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray that would extend the federal health insurance subsidies for 2 years and allow states to allow health associations to offer low-cost, bare-bones insurance is sitting in Congress but has not yet been voted on. Which brings us to the Republican tax reform bill, already approved by the House of Representatives. It would get rid of the individual mandate under the Affordable Care Act that requires everyone to purchase health insurance or else pay a fine. And we learned just this week that the tax reform bill would eliminate the income tax deduction for people who have large out-of-pocket medical expenses. This is a question to all 4 panelists. Given these recent actions, in just a few words, how would you describe the state of the Affordable Care Act program right now?
Ma'am?
You go.
No, please. Go ahead.
So, despite what everybody tries to say in Washington, the Affordable Care Act is not dead yet. In the first 2 weeks of enrollment, we've seen somewhere north of 50% more people enroll than they had in the same time last year. And the favorability of the Affordable Care Act is higher than it's been since it was passed. So despite significant efforts and some significant successes in trying to undermine it, it still lives on.
I would add to that I do think that there is a commitment from this administration to destroy everything that the previous administration did. And therefore, even though I would agree with everything the lady said, I would still say it is precarious. Because if there's anything that they can do, particularly with the attempted elimination of the individual mandate and with the executive order that got rid of the subsidies for insurance companies, both of these things are absolutely essential for the program to continue. So even though I agree with everything the lady said, I would still say it is precarious.
Cindy?
So I think the ACA was incredibly helpful to New York. It took us from one of the most dysfunctional insurance markets in the country to one of the best functioning markets in the country. We made the very smart decision of creating our own exchange, which has allowed us to set a lot of rules that mean that some of the federal decisions don't necessarily apply here, like the enrollment periods and that sort of thing. I totally agree that it's under a great deal of threat right now because of, even if they can't pass legislation, the administration has made it clear that they're going to do everything that they can through rule to try to undermine it, and I think that would be extremely detrimental to New York.
And, I would just echo what my panelists had said. I think the Affordable Care Act is surprisingly resilient. Despite the numerous attacks by the administration. For New York Presbyterian and for other large hospitals and small hospitals around the state, I think our biggest concern is that the Medicaid program, both the expansion within the Affordable Care Act and other components of it are under attack by the administration. And regardless of what happens with the ACA and the repeal efforts for the ACA, the Medicaid program is an enormous, it's enormously useful and important to this state, and so we remain very concerned about its viability.
This question is addressed to Lisa. Lisa, so far, at this point right now, so far, what impact, if any, have these efforts to whittle away at affordable care had on the people of New York?
So 2 million New Yorkers got access to health care insurance through the Affordable Care Act. 1 million of those or so through Medicaid expansion and 1 million through the state health insurance exchange. And so far, they still have access to that health insurance. I think we've seen certainly pressures already on our hospital delivery system because there have been reductions in the funding for our safety net hospitals that have had an impact on, certainly on the city, Health and Hospitals Corporation. And so we are only beginning to see sort of the reduced access that I think we might anticipate is going to grow. The other thing I would have to say is in the efforts to bolster funding for our hospital delivery networks, public health funding, social service programs are the first to get cut. And so I think you're also going to see reductions in the level at which we're supporting low-income and immigrant families with very needed social services. And just to provide context, and I'm sorry, this is a little extra, but in the United States, 63% of people with the Affordable Care Act, 63% of people cannot afford a $1,000 medical bill without going into debt. And 40% of them can't afford a $100 medical bill without going into debt. So people living paycheck to paycheck just don't have the ability to absorb more healthcare costs, and that's really what we're going to be seeing growth in as we go forward.
Well, the subsidies are also gone, right, as of right now. So I assume insurance is going to be costing more?
Well, I think the increase in insurance rates, and we'll check with Emlyn Health, in some measure, the kind of growth that we've seen was in anticipation of subsidies being cut. I think there will be even higher insurance rates, but to some extent that's been built into this year's increases. Okay. However, if in the tax bill the individual mandate is dropped, that will cause an equivalent increase over and above that.
Okay. Senator.
Yes, ma'am.
Has the whittling away of the Affordable Care Act that we've seen so far, has it had any impact so far on the state budget or on state spending?
Well, to answer kind of a question that you asked earlier as well, what is the impact on the people of New York? Anyone who's paying attention is shook. That is one very clear result. As far as the state budget is concerned, one of the things that we did in this year's budget is that we built in a mechanism whereby if $850 million or more is cut from the federal government, from the federal budget, from the federal money that comes to the state, then the governor is authorized to create an alternative budget. Then we have to go back for a special session and vote on that. That would not get activated. We're almost at the point of, I can barely believe it, but we are almost at the point where we're going to discuss another budget. It's like just around the corner in a month or so. So for the moment, there has not been an impact, but first of all, we're looking at a $2.4 billion deficit next year, just overall in the state, so it's going to be a tough budget year to begin with. And then the fact that we know that, again, this magnificent administration, I know I'm televised, so I can only use certain words, this magnificent administration is dead set on destroying something which has actually saved people's lives and saved states money at the same time. We're in for a heck of a ride next year.
Kate, has this whittling away had any impact on hospitals and medical care facilities in New York so far?
Well, I would say that we as an institution are sort of steeling ourselves for these cuts and future cuts. We already are taking measures to cut $250 million a year from our budget. And we are doing this in areas that are not patient-facing so that we can fulfill our mission. But, we're New York Presbyterian, we're very big. Imagine if this is what we're doing, what happens to our hospitals in the city and health and hospitals. What happens to providers who are not part of a larger system where we can, we have some cushion and we can offset our high Medicaid providers. So certainly we're feeling the impact. We just saw a new regulation finalized last week that would cut our drug payments from Medicare, and that will impact all safety net hospitals. So, the hits just keep on coming.
Cindy, what impact so far has this whittling away of the Affordable Care Act had on the insurance companies?
Well, there were so many things in the Affordable Care Act that were very specifically put into place, especially over the course of the first 2 or 3 years of its existence, to try to keep the market stable, sort of understanding that it was going to be hard to know in the beginning, what kinds of people were going to come into the market, how sick they were going to be, that sort of thing. And you know, unlike any other major social legislation that's ever been passed, there has never been one opportunity to go back in and fix errors. You know, when we passed Medicare, when we passed Medicaid, we spent the next 5 to 10 years fixing errors, and not one thing that was an issue in the ACA has been even tweaked. And so what you're seeing are things like a real attack against some of those stability measures. The cost-sharing reductions, which we were talking about earlier. You know, I'm not a native New Yorker, and we Minnesotans think that we're always the smartest kids on the bus, but I'm here to tell you New York was super smart in how they implemented and took advantage of a piece of the ACA that actually allowed us, instead of getting traditional cost-sharing reduction payments, New York created what's called an essential plan. And most of the people that are eligible for those CSR payments are in the essential plan. The funding for that is different. Even though CSR payments come to the state, they come not through the insurance companies, but through the state. So there's a very good chance that New York is going to have preserved its CSR funding, unlike any other state in the country except Minnesota, which also created an essential plan. But we still are seeing a lot of other provisions that were meant to create stability that have not been implemented or have not been funded, and so we're still seeing a lot of instability, which New Yorkers are seeing in the form of much higher premiums than there should be right now.
How much are premiums going up?
Well, again, I'm just going to give a comparison. So I think that the average premium increases this year in the individual market, which is really the market that's the most unstable, are about 13%. Now, compare that with all of the states that don't have CSR funding that was just stopped this month. They're having to add about an extra 15 to 20% onto their premiums to make up for the fact that those CSR funds, which were expected, and the health plans are still going to need to cover all of the cost sharing that those funds were supposed to cover, so they've had to build it into the premiums. And so again, even though 13% is very high, New York has really sort of protected itself, unlike most other states that have had to increase by 25% or more.
Lisa, just rattle off, if you would, what important elements of the Affordable Care Act remain in place?
So one of the most critical is for the plans that are still being sold until they come up with cheaper alternatives and association health plans, the essential health benefits remain in place. And that means that, for example, you couldn't believe this, but maternity care is covered in all insurance plans. Didn't always work like that. Mental health, substance abuse treatment. There's a full range of benefits that are available. There are no lifetime limits. You can't rate women different. Women don't have to pay more than men. Preventive care, and including reproductive health care, is available with no copayments and no deductibles, so you have no disincentive to do the preventive care that you need. And for those states that have it, the Medicaid expansion is still in place, which in New York allowed 1 million new people to get access to in health insurance.
I am assuming that in the short term, you're hoping that the Alexander Murray bill would pass, because at least it would restore the subsidies for a couple of years.
Correct. It would ensure the subsidies for a couple of years, which would provide some stabilization. And while it allows for some less expensive plans with less coverage to be created, there still are the options for people to get reasonable health care insurance at an affordable price.
Senator.
Yes, ma'am.
If the Republican tax plan passes, and it has passed the House, and the individual mandate is eliminated, will that essentially kill affordable care?
You basically got it. Please, first of all, I'll remind everyone that the individual mandate was a Republican idea, lest we forget. This idea, which was in the McCain health plan all the way back when he was running for president. But anyway, that would, the reason why that is important is because you need to have, the way that insurance works, and obviously the insurance person could explain much better than me, but the way that insurance works is you have a shared pool of risk. So there are some people who you're going to spend more money on because they're sicker, they're older, etc. But there's younger people that you're going to spend less money on. You need those younger people and the healthy people in the plan to balance out the risk among all the people that are in the plan. So by taking the individual mandate out, as well as by expanding the short-term plans, as was done in the executive order a couple of months ago, or a couple of weeks, it's a couple of months,
Feels like
weeks,
months.
it feels like years. And they're trying, basically this administration is trying to, by fiat, because I don't know if folks that are paying much more attention to what's happening at the national level, at the congressional level, would tell me that it's not likely that this particular tax plan will pass. Listen to our prayers. But they're trying to do everything that they can in the administration by executive fiat to weaken the Affordable Care Act, to make it harder for it to stand on its own 2 feet. If the short version short answer to your question, if the individual mandate is taken out, it basically guts it.
Insurance person, do you agree?
Yes, I think that the thing that people hated the most about insurance before the ACA was that insurance companies were allowed to deny people who were sick. What the ACA did was it instituted something called guaranteed issue, and that means that anybody who comes knocking at our door can have coverage. If you don't match that with an individual mandate, then, and people know that they can get coverage whenever they need it, a lot of the younger, healthier people are going to wait until they need coverage to come to our door. So that's why the individual mandate is so important. Now, many of you may remember that New York actually did implement a guaranteed issue many years ago without an individual mandate, and it basically destroyed the individual market. It went from a market of 300,000 people as the young people jumped out, the costs spiraled and spiraled because there were less people to share the cost until you ended up with a market of about 30,000 people, all of whom were paying well over $1,000 a month in premiums. And we can't have that happen again. And that's why the individual mandate is so important, because it allows us to do guaranteed issue, which allows us to make sure that everyone has access to coverage.
These questions address the long-term impact should the Affordable Care Act be repealed. Lisa, in the long term, what do you see as the biggest threat to New Yorkers' health care under the Trump administration?
I think twofold. The first of which is we have a very elaborate and quite subsidized safety net public hospital system that is really struggling right now. That threat is going to get much bigger, and I don't know that we have, in the context of state budgets and cities' budgets, the wherewithal to continue to support that. And so access to safety net hospitals, the public hospitals, which is in low-income communities and marginalized communities, is really at risk. Secondly, again, what always happens when we have these budget cuts is the easiest thing to cut around healthcare are the social services and the community-based organization care. And if 20% of your health relates to medical care and 20% relates to your behaviors, 60% of it relates to the factors of the neighborhoods where you live, work, and play. And those are the programs that are going to be cut, and they're going to get cut substantially. So I think those are the two, our most vulnerable New Yorkers are most at risk.
Governor Cuomo has said that more than 27 million New Yorkers would lose coverage if the Affordable Care Act is repealed. Senator, you have said that any federal, and I'll use your term, messing around with Medicaid funds.
I saw that you're quoting me directly in our conversation. Yes, I did say that.
For example, moving to block grants, which some of the Republican bills have tried to do. And New York would really, if they did that, New York would really be screwed. Could you explain? What do you mean by that?
Yes, ma'am. First of all, I might have used a stronger term. However, we are televised. The way that it currently works is that the state and federal government share costs of Medicaid services. Now, on top of that, the state of New York has been kind of ahead of the curve in a lot of different ways, in the ways that we use Medicaid money. I'd go back to what Lisa said earlier, and she hit on something very important. We can have a whole conversation about the ACA as we've been having, but the conversation about Medicaid needs to be at the center of the table, because block granting means that as opposed to paying roughly 50% of what the services that are rendered, what the federal government will do is basically say, yeah, here you go. Here's a block of money, and you figure out what you do with it. That block of money by necessity would be so much less than we're getting now. We had not only are we talking about less money, but also there have been a lot of very creative ways that the state of New York has used Medicaid money to be able to deliver high quality care at lower costs. So block granting a system, going to block grants, which is something that Tom Price, the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, who lost his job because he flew on private airplanes when he was going to things. Yeah, this administration, so magnificent it is. The former Secretary of Health and Human Services was dead set on doing this while he was in Congress. I am uncertain how the current nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services feels about it. I am guessing that they're probably going to try to go in the same direction, and if that's the case, it would be disastrous for New York.
Again, to the senator, so how is New York dealing with the threatened loss of Medicaid funding? I'm talking in Albany, are you fighting back, and if so, how?
Well, we certainly have. I mean, as I said earlier, the one thing that we did in this year's budget, is that we gave ourselves that mechanism so that we could potentially go back in the middle of the year, which is very, very rare, right? It's not something that we want to do, to go and change the budget in the middle of a year, but we gave ourselves the ability to do that. And we're also having conversations about how best to deal with this, but it is not an easy thing. It is. We're looking at billions of dollars. We're looking at millions of people not covered, and it goes down to the basics. This is one of the things that I just run my head up against the wall consistently, particularly with my Republican colleagues, because every single individual human being is going to need health coverage, whether it is for something as simple as a cold or for something as difficult as cancer and everything in between. So if you believe that there is no responsibility from us as a society to make it so that someone is sick, regardless of whether they can afford something or not, right, that they get the coverage that they need. If you do not believe that, then I can do nothing for you. As far as the state of New York, one of the things, as you said earlier, I'm the prime sponsor of a bill to create a single-payer system in the state of New York. And I do believe that we need to do that nationally, but at the state level, we are saying we can do it, we can save money, and it is something that we need to do as a responsibility to our fellow citizens and residents of our state.
You're talking about the New York Health Act.
Indeed.
Which I was reading about. It sounds like a miracle bill, because I read a description of it. Under it, 98% of New Yorkers would spend less for health coverage and care than they do now. New York would save more than $70 billion by eliminating health insurance company administration and profit, reducing health care provider and employer administrative costs, capturing savings from negotiating prices of pharmaceuticals and medical devices. There would be no more deductibles, copays, out-of-network charges. If it's so great, why hasn't the legislature passed it?
First of all, it sounds like I'm offering a lot of ponies, doesn't it? It just sounds like a pony, and people are like, really, is that? The fact is that to answer your question, the legislature has passed it in the Assembly for the last 4 years, I believe. The bill, when I picked it up, it was formerly sponsored by former State Senator Bill Perkins, who became a council member. When he had it, it had 22 sponsors. I picked it up, it now has 31 sponsors out of 63 in the Senate. So we're working on getting that 32nd person in the Senate to sponsor it, which would mean we would have the majority of the Senate as sponsors. And one of the things, I'm working along with my colleague in the Assembly, Dick Gottfried, who's the chair of the Health Committee there. And we have been doing a lot of work with the individuals who will be impacted, and we're kind of bringing everybody to the table to really have a thorough conversation of how it would actually work. It seems, on paper, it seems too good as you're talking about it, right? But once you go down into the details, it can actually work like that. We can actually save money by, first of all, as I said, if you include everybody in the pool, you actually can lower people's costs. If you have a single payer, a single source of payment, it is much less complicated. There's a lot of less administration that can happen. There's some more negotiation that can be done on a macro level for drug prices. I mean, there's a lot of things that are built into the bill, which would actually serve to control costs in ways that the current system does not. It is incredibly difficult. California got very close to passing it, and it failed there, partly because they didn't do the work that Dick and I are doing right now. We are making sure that if people have issues with it, and there's been tweaks that we've had to make, and that we will need to make in the next months and years to come. But I feel convinced that we being not only New York, but the entire country of the United States being the only country, the only advanced country that does not have a system of this kind, we need to have our version of it, certainly, but we need to move towards it because people are still going to get sick and it's still going to cost us money, and we still need to fix it.
Cindy, how do the insurance companies feel about a universal single-payer system for New York State?
Well, we are very much in favor of universal coverage. We are not in favor of achieving it through a single-payer system. I think in particular when you're looking at the state level, it presumes some things that I don't think are practical. One of them being there are a lot of employers that self-insure and are protected under federal law, and so I don't think that you could bring them into the system legally without a federal law change. It also presumes that the feds would turn over Medicare money to the state, which I don't think is going to happen either. And I think that so you end up left with a lot of still different administrative functions that are still going to be costly, and there's still a lot of differences in who you submit claims to and that sort of thing. I do think that, and I have been nervous in watching how the ACA is sort of being undermined, that there are days when I wake up and think, oh my gosh, I think that we're going to end up going there anyway, even though I don't think people will like it because the insurance market may very well be destroyed from regulatory changes. And so we do think a lot about, so what are the problems that really need to be solved? There is a lot that we can do to work on the administrative issues that just sort of create cost. But when you really look at what the cost of going to a single payer system will be, factoring in that we now have by far and large an employer-based system where a lot of the employer dollars would need to be recaptured. I just sort of think that universal coverage is the goal. In this country, we have always, because for years and years it's been an employer-based system, we've always tried to find ways to do this through market forces rather than a government-run system. And I also think that, frankly, this state in particular, this is one of the things I've learned about New York, is the economy of this state is very reliant on hospitals and providers. We've built a lot of our economy on the medical industry, and I think that it would be very hard for the New York State government to shift to a single funding mechanism where the budget fights that you would have to have and the inability to sort of shift some of the underfunding of government programs that now happens by having the private sector pick up some of that funding. I think that might put that section of the economy at risk as well. And so I think that it's not the right way for New York to go, but I do think that it opens up a very good conversation about what kinds of problems need to be solved in order to make sure that we do have really high quality, really effective, and really efficient, which is the key, universal coverage for everyone.
Cindy, this is for you as well. What do you see as the biggest long-term threat to insurance companies under the Trump administration?
Well, surprisingly, we've talked a lot about some of the stability mechanisms that aren't really being supported right now under the administration. I do think that, there are folks in the administration that do understand what some of the changes are that need to be made. And so we are still sort of trying to argue to get those changes made, through sort of like the lower channels and that sort of thing. I worry a lot about the fact that he put out an executive order that is asking the Department of Labor to rewrite the employer laws in such a way where I believe that what it would do is allow associations, national associations, to come in and cherry pick all of our healthy small groups and self-employed individuals out of our market, which would leave the rest of our markets with holding a very big bag of higher premiums that they would have to pay. I'm very worried about that. We're waiting for the Department of Labor to put that rule out very soon. And frankly, I really worry about, and I think this goes beyond the insurance companies here, but the whole economy of the state has really relied on the creative ways that we have funded Medicaid in this state. And I'm very, very worried about the fact that it's clear to me that the administration really wants to do not just Medicaid reform, but also all what they call entitlement reform. And what they really want to do is cut back significantly on government programs that I think in this day and age, with our aging population and that sort of thing, we should be going the opposite way, frankly. And so I do worry about New York, because I think New York in particular has been creative and has taken advantage of federal funding to help support a lot of the programs in the state. And I think that will translate into an impact directly on our business, because all of our providers will be underfunded, and so they'll be looking to us to help solve that problem.
Kate, when we talked recently, you said that New York hospitals has actually lost money under the Affordable Care Act.
That's true. It's true. And the reason for that actually is because New York State has been so progressive with its Medicaid program historically. So New York didn't have the number of uninsured that other states did. And one of the large ways that Congress paid for the ACA was through a series of cuts to hospitals and other providers under Medicare and Medicaid. A couple of those buckets were payments to safety net providers for uncompensated care. So if you're located in a community with high uninsured rates or high Medicaid rates, as a hospital, to encourage you to stay there and to provide the best services possible, both Medicare and Medicaid would provide you with what's known as disproportionate share hospital payments. So, taking a step back, and actually before, I also am not a native New Yorker. I lived and worked in Washington, D.C. for a long time and worked in the Senate. And I was one of the staffers who worked on the Affordable Care Act, and I worked for the Budget Committee chairman. So we cared about the impact on the deficit. We cared about being able to pay for the program. And when we looked at the buckets of money out there in the aggregate across the country, we said, if we're going to be increasing the number of covered lives in the country by 20 million, I think we initially projected it was going to be 24 million, but thanks to maybe even higher, but thanks to the Supreme Court making the Medicaid expansion optional, unfortunately, some individuals, low-income individuals in many states, don't have that coverage available to them. But regardless, we looked and said, well, there should be fewer uninsured people, so we're going to reduce these extra payments to hospitals because they're going to be getting insured customers, insured patients in return. Well, in New York, that calculus wasn't there just because we had such already sort of a creative Medicaid program that looked at all the ways possible to draw down more federal money to give people health insurance. So for New York hospitals, we all took those disproportionate share hospital cuts, didn't get a lot more covered lives, but frankly, we all were still incredibly supportive of the ACA and still are.
But despite those cuts, I think you said they were ameliorated somewhat by something called the Delivery Systems Reform Incentive Payment Program,
Yeah,
otherwise
just
known
flows
as,
off the tongue.
Yeah, it does.
otherwise
It
known
does.
as DISRIP. Could you sort of,
Sure.
I don't totally understand it, but maybe you can
Sure.
help us.
Let's see. So you know.
I've practiced this, by the way,
So-
because I've had to explain it to people. So you want to take a
Sure.
shot? Go
Well,
ahead.
yeah, I'll take a shot. I actually oversaw our application for NYP for the DISRIP program. So it's a New York State Medicaid program, and again, through the kind of creative funding approaches, and really a progressive mindset by our government here in New York. We were able to draw down billions of additional dollars from the federal government, and in return, groups of providers, hospitals partnered with social service organizations, partnered with nursing homes and doctors. We formed groups that said, hey, you know, we're going to take on a number of projects to actually reduce our number of emergency room patients. We're going to reduce our number of patients who are admitted for unnecessary reasons. And the reason that's going to work out is because we're going to get these extra payments for performance from New York State. And so for a number of systems, look, this is how healthcare works. This is how it works on an institutional level, and this is how it works on a state level, and this is how it works on a national level. Everything is intertwined. So what we get from Medicaid, what we get from Medicare, what we get from our commercial populations, it's all intertwined. And so, you know, we're constantly trying to balance it so that we can not just keep our doors open, but keep moving the ball forward on things like clinical research. New York State actually is a global leader in things like cancer research, developing cures. So it's all a kind of a wonderful balance, and DISRIP was a very, very important piece of it, so we could take on these things that we don't get paid for. These aren't services, but they're really important.
But the hospitals actually get bonuses for reducing the number of hospital readmissions, for reducing emergency room visits, providing preventive and quality care that
The groups of providers, so the acronym is the PPS, the Performing Provider System. And so for New York Presbyterian, we have, you know, dozens and dozens of partners. So our collective PPS, if we collectively are successful, and so for example, we have projects to get mental health workers out into the community to identify patients who are in crisis so they don't come to the emergency room. And you know, those people who are out in the community are our partners, our partnering social service organizations. It's not, you know, our hospital workers, but we collectively are doing this, and then we collectively, if we're successful, which we've been, get bonus payments.
So you do rate the performance of DISRIP so far as having been successful.
Yeah, and you know, it's not just about reducing the emergency room visits and reducing avoidable readmissions to our inpatient units. It's also about quality, and so there are a number of metrics the state is following, and this is the other thing about the Affordable Care Act being in threat that's really important to understand is that certainly everyone knows about the coverage expansion, and that's very important, and all the stuff the Trump administration is doing to undermine people getting access to health insurance. It's incredibly important. For hospitals, for your hospitals and doctors, though, there is a whole other section, I believe it was Title III, and we, under that section, are now subject to an enormous number of quality requirements and conditions on our Medicare payments that say if you're not doing a good job, if you're not performing quality care, you're not going to get paid as much. So for us, the idea of the Affordable Care Act going away, think about it, you as a patient, that is not good. So that's another very, very large, important part of ACA.
The hospital is a huge industry, and I assume a huge lobby. So what are the hospitals doing to fight back?
A lot. Certainly hospitals are a very large, very large group collectively. We have a number of trade associations in Washington. You know, we're lobbying. You would think that with our Senate Minority Leader being from New York, we're very fortunate having Leader Schumer, and you know, just objectively, a president from New York State should want to protect the state where he's from, and it's really incredible that it's been the exact opposite. If you look at the tax bill and what the impact would be on New York State, it's just it's really puzzling. But so certainly, New York Presbyterian also on its own partners with other large institutions around the country. So Johns Hopkins, you know, other very large systems, so that we can, you know, have the most impact possible. But look, you know, we threw our lot in with the ACA. Hospitals were all on board for health insurance and coverage and improved quality. So now the current regime in Washington, you know, I think they are less inclined to be sympathetic to us, since I think they viewed us as, you know, being with the Obama administration, and I don't think they're inclined to help us out.
This is to the Senator and to Lisa as well, if you want to respond. Again, I'm interested in how you rate the performance of DSRIP so far.
So to bottom line it, because it is incredibly complicated, and it took me like 2.5 years to understand this freaking thing, by the way. The most expensive patients are Medicaid patients, are people that go to the emergency room or people that are hospitalized. So we said, so DSRIP is this waiver that we got from federal government, in which we went to the federal government and said, look, if we take the hospitalization rate of patients down 25% within 5 years, we're going to save a lot of money. So why don't you give us some money to invest in our system so that we can provide care more effectively, more efficiently, and of high quality, and make sure that people that would have gone to the hospitals, would have been admitted to hospitals or gone to the emergency room, we're not going to have them, so it's going to cost less money. And it took us like 3 years to convince the federal government to give us the money. They give us about $8 billion, but that is a promissory note. It basically means, okay, we got $8 billion, but you're going to have to prove to us that you can achieve the criteria that you gave us. This is when the lady was referring to programs or projects. Each PPS, or it's basically just a geographical region, right? This group of providers takes care of a certain population, and they're responsible for those lives, and they get money based on how well they perform or not. So they're all over the state. We're in the 3rd year, and I would say that overall, I think it's, first of all, the good thing is that we made the agreement. It's kind of like a contract, and it happened before this administration took over. So we are good until 2020. I would say that we are that even though there have been some challenges in getting more community-based providers more involved in making sure that they get the money flowing to them, I would say that it is a positive thing, because we actually have ultimately billions of dollars in the system that is being invested into getting higher quality care for these folks, getting preventive care in places where they didn't have it, and really having a partnership of local organizations that say, we know our population, so we're going to make sure that we take care of it the best way possible. And one parenthesis, I know that the current guy is from Queens, but I do not blame you for him. I just want you to know. I'm looking at I know that you're not even a Queens guy, but you are now, by extension, a Queens guy, because you're the president here, so I don't blame you. I just want you to know that.
They're happy that he's gone. I just want to reinforce one comment that you made, because New York State got $8 billion, and it was essentially handed to the acute care system to figure out how to reform the networks. And the most profound incentive is to reduce readmissions that are not necessary and to reduce the number of ED visits. And from that respect, we have progress. There have been a drop in hospital admissions and readmissions, and we could have, that isn't hard. That could have been done earlier. There was no financial incentive to do that, so now there is. There are a lot of community-based organizations in the networks of these performing provider systems, PPSs, and they're not getting much money, and they're not very involved, because the system is focused on the sickest patients and keeping them out of the hospital. So I go back to what I said earlier, somewhere between 20 and 40% of the health of a community has to do with medical care. And my organization is getting paid to fill out surveys, which I think will end. But unless you can show a pretty short-term return on investment for the provision of the kind of social services that people need to be healthier, they're not really being involved in a meaningful way. And it's a very, very small proportion of the money that's gone to DSRIP that's actually focused, which was another goal of DSRIP, on really improving community health.
This is talking about survival. Senator, this is for you.
Yeah.
If the Affordable Care Act is repealed, neutered, neutralized by this administration,
Yeah.
can New York
Go ahead.
go it alone?
It would be exceedingly difficult because if they got that far, it means that they would probably the rest of the agenda of this administration would probably means that they would have achieved it as it relates to healthcare. And I just can't get over this. I really can't get over this. To me, it's such a fundamental friggin' thing. People are going to get sick. So unless you feel that if somebody is sick and can't afford it, they should just let them die on the damn street, then we have a friggin' responsibility. And this is not what these people are talking about. This administration is talking about this idea. It's the extreme idea, excuse me, that you're basically on your own. And if you're poor and you can't afford health care, then too bad for you, buddy. You didn't work hard enough. So I guess you're just going to have to die with that cancer. That's what it comes down to. So if they're successful in gutting the ACA legislatively, if they're actually that's successful, it means that they're successful in everything else. They're successful in block granting it. They're successful on gutting Medicare, on gutting Medicaid. They're successful on on creating a situation in which like millions of people are just going to die because they don't have access to basic health care.
Well, this has certainly been a very interesting and informative discussion about an extremely important issue. I want to thank all of the panelists for joining us this morning. I want to thank everyone in the audience for coming. Our next forum will be held March 23rd when Queens College is presenting a forum on sustainability and the city. Again, anyone wishing to give a donation can do so at our reception table on your way out. I hope you enjoyed the forum, and I'd like to thank you all for coming, and also thank QPTV for cablecasting the live event. We look forward to seeing you